The Inner Light, an analysis of George Harrison's handwriting. For someone educated in 1950s England, George had a pretty typical handwriting style. In this postcard, he is writing to his mother whilst hitchhiking around England with Paul at the age of 16. The first thing to note is the sizes of the zones. They give us an order of importance in terms of George's thinking at the time of writing. The zones are almost balanced, but the differences are there to be seen. The lower zone, George's biggest zone, is the sphere of the unconscious, instinctual and biological needs. This makes sense for someone who is hitchhiking. He is running on instinct and concern with his biological needs. The next biggest zone is the upper zone. It represents George's intellectual, spiritual and cultural aspirations. These are all quite important to George. Lastly, the middle zone reflects George's concerns with his social life and everyday matters. These are last in his personal hierarchy of concerns. His baselines are mostly straight. In the first half, the lines seem to fall slightly, but I think this is possibly because he wrote on the postcard at a slight angle and then, realizing his error, he straightened the postcard and carried on writing, because the rest of the postcard is written with a straight baseline. If the falling lines were not merely an accident, it would mean his recollection of his journey was depressing to him, which would seem strange. A straight baseline is a sign of composure, emotional stability, dependability, and perseverance. The next thing to consider is slant. This is the most standout feature in this piece of writing. There is a mixture of slants, which demonstrate a nervousness with unsettled emotions and an erratic mode of expression. The pressure is firm but not heavy, meaning George is confident but not aggressive or arrogant. There is energy in the thickness of the strokes too. This is the energy he applies to everything he does. George's handwriting is of an average size, which is good. The size is a measure of the size of the writer's ego, and an average size indicates a normal-sized ego with a sense of practicality and realism. Spacing within the words is fairly balanced, a demonstration of the ability to be close or reserved when appropriate. Spacing between the lines is mostly regular, with slight tangling where the postcard slant was changed. Tangling indicates confusion in thinking. It's often found in the handwriting of people who constantly need to express themselves through artistic projects. However, there's not much tangling here, so I don't think this applies much. George filled all the space on the message part of the card, so clearly he was talkative. However, he didn't write over the printed parts, or run out of space, or run into the address section. If he had, it would mean that he had a fear of barriers between himself and others, and possibly that he even had a fear of death. Fortunately, I don't think any of that applies. The speed of his writing is average, aided by his cursive writing. The speed of someone's handwriting is connected to their intellect. His speed shows him to be bright, but not exceptional. Rhythm and form quality are fairly good here. There's an absence of starts and stops, and his copybook-influenced style shows some maturity and a relaxed demeanour. There is also room for some spontaneity, as he uses partial connectivity. George makes deep, garland-styled strokes, shapes, and lead-ins. His is the handwriting of someone who places more emphasis on contemplation and the inner world. These sorts of people can be impressionable, sentimental, sedate, and sympathetic, but they are also warm, quiet, gentle people, who are often collectors. The ovals of his handwriting are normal. This is an indication of an honest yet discreet persona. This surprised me slightly, because in Memoirs, Billy expressed a concern about George's ability to stay silent about him being Paul's replacement. The personal pronoun I is based on a traditional palmar I. It also leans left. The balance of the upper and lower sections, combined with the direction of the leaning, relates to the influence of the mother and the father. George's personal pronoun I shows a healthy relationship with his parents, and especially his mother. George's small letter D shows both quiet pride and dignity, but also some sensitivity. It's the D of a person that doesn't always handle criticism that well. His T-bars are very interesting. Like myself, George has 3 kinds of T's, which change depending on how they are needed. One shows calmness and self-control, another shows mental agility, and the third shows tenacity and great concentration. The I dots are high and over the stem. They demonstrate great imagination and a spiritual inclination. His capitals still have some curlicues, just like the teenage Paul's handwriting. This shows a small streak of vanity. George's small letters are rounded, with a small middle zone. They demonstrate a careful and creative mind, someone who builds a mental construct bit by bit, but only after the facts are known and proven. His small letter G's and Y's indicate he has a warm and receptive attitude towards sex. They show a flexible nature, free of fear and inhibition. Lastly, his signature matches the rest of his script, although it is lighter in pressure, possibly because his ink was running low. This demonstrates an honest demeanour and someone who is comfortable with himself. This is a postcard to George's sister, written when he was 17. Here we see that George was fairly stable-minded. His handwriting doesn't change that much over the years, which is what we should see in a mature person. So I could have stopped after the first postcard, but there are other subtle changes to be detailed in other handwriting samples. In this example, the cramming in of 18 lines of text in the message section of a standard-sized postcard has meant the talkative George has had to truncate his letter forming slightly, or else slant the direction of his words in order to fit them all in. It's also quite impressive to fit 18 lines of text. Consequently, the middle zone has become balanced in size with the upper and lower zones. This isn't a bad thing. It just means George has a flexible view with regards to his own thoughts and feelings. He can express himself and accomplish his goals with some ease. His ego has a sense of equilibrium, and his sense of place in society matters a little bit more to him now that he's in a touring band. He signs off with "Love George" in capitals, which is the text equivalent of shouting, but it's a happy shout though, rather than an angry one. He also writes "important locations" in capitals too. By the time George wrote this letter to his sister at the age of 20, he was beginning to experience Beatlemania. Again, his handwriting is still mostly the same, but now there is more spacing between his words. This shows his need for psychological space. The stresses of his fame are beginning to show. The left and right margins are starting to reveal a lack of consideration and reserve for others that was not there before. He signs off with the first part of his new autograph rather than his normal signature. Perhaps this artificial person of George the Beatle has become the new habit for him. He qualifies it, though, by also signing off with brother, written in brackets, as though his sister might not know which of her brothers is in an internationally famous touring band who has just met Roy Orbison. Bless him. He's just trying to claw back himself from the fans. George's signature from his updated passport is simple, legible, and without embellishments or underlinings. This shows him to be a practical and realistic person with no airs and graces. Also note his height is listed here too, 5'10". Next, let's look at a letter written to his parents. Although the underlying style of George's handwriting is still present here, we can see it is starting to seriously unravel in terms of the quality of his letter forming. This unravelling mirrors his sense of equilibrium, which is also unravelling. The increased gapping within and between his words is a plea for both psychological and physical space. Also, the presence of a left-hand margin but no right-hand one is a sign of his increased impulsiveness and frustration. I think that, at this point, George is beginning to be fed up with being fab, as he would later describe it. Now we'll take a look at the handwritten song lyrics for I, Me, Mine. Here we have a more mature version of George's handwriting. His old style is still here, but now some of the tension is gone. The spacing between words is a bit erratic though, so there's still some emotional instability in his life at this point. The zones have also rebalanced, back to the order of importance that we saw at the start in his handwriting at the age of 16. This is another similar piece of writing to the last one. The interesting thing here is that George has crushed all of the lyrics to All Things Must Pass into one small piece of paper. Why did he do this? Having no margins is normally the sign of someone who desperately needs to plan and fill every moment of the day. These are people who cause strong feelings in others, either positive or negative, and try to eliminate barriers between themselves and others due to a fear of isolation. They also talk too much. All or any of these things could be true, or maybe the crushed writing is simply an act of convenience. Next, we're going to look at 3 postcards sent to Ringo. This one is from 1978. I have included the cover image as well because it features the beautiful shadows of George with his second wife, Olivia. Both the image and the writing are joyous. The ascending baseline of his message is so extreme that his handwriting is actually diagonal. George was obviously very happy when he wrote this. Also, by this point, George usually wrote the Hindu Om sign under his own name and a Christian cross under Olivia's. These signs might as well be flags or standards to represent themselves. By the time George wrote this postcard in 1982, his handwriting started to slant more towards the right. This is a great move. It means that he was beginning to look to the future with a real sense of positivity. The lower loops of his G's and Y's are now very big and full. This is a sign of someone who has a lot of energy and who gets very emotionally involved with things. It also indicates someone who has fully embraced their own sexuality. This last postcard shows 2 interesting additions. Firstly, that George's handwriting has started to leave off any fancy frills and lead-ins, which is a sign of maturity. Secondly, that his small letter K has become what is known as the rebellious K. This type of K shows that, at this point, he is fully independent in his outlook and doing his own thing. Finally, let's fast forward to the end of George's life. This set of lyrics to the song Brainwashed are work in progress, so they are a little scrappy. However, the point of my including them is to show that his basic handwriting style was the same right up until the end. Confident, warm, open, and spiritually inclined. He was also still a little moody. He was a musician after all. I once read in a comments section of a video about George that if you've led a meaningful life, George will eventually become your favourite Beatle. I understand that sentiment. Certainly George was more stable than John and also Ringo. which we will see in the next video. In the meantime, thanks for watching and goodbye.